So I made a post a couple of days ago about a class I would give on the Tulsa riots, something that was pretty short, uh, but a requirement for our equal opportunity class. So I did give it today and got pretty good reviews. So I wanted to share it with everyone, just to get your feedback as well. So I'll share my slide on this. So again, my class was on the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. So basically, to go over the class, what I did is I kind of discussed events leading up to the massacre, then went over some statistics from the event, and then basically kind of drew it back into how it applied to us today. So basically, I broke it down into four items that we discussed that led up to the massacre. So the first being slavery. Of course, it was a institutionalized system in America where the socialization of racism was totally normal. People were definitely discriminated upon based on their ethnicity and color. And overall, it was just accepted as a norm because that discrimination and disparity was socialized. So, of course, over time, you start having abolitionists and people who decide to quit being a bystander and watching the atrocities and actually take action. And of course, that would kick off the Civil War, which was basically a war in which many argue with state rights. They didn't want the government to come down, tell states how to run. In specific, the Southern way of life evolved around slavery. So, of course, it was states' rights to own slavery that pretty much kicked it off. Of course, it was a bad war. It put father against son, brother against brother, tore apart families, and of course, was one of the deadliest wars we ever took part in since it involved Americans fighting Americans. The death toll was pretty high. Um, so, of course, after the war, uh, slavery was abolished in America. About half a century earlier, of course, it was abolished in England by King George III and his wife, Queen Charlotte Sophia, who also was very active in the abolishment process there. So anyway, when this happened, there was the question of what will the newly freed people do? They're not educated. They don't have land. Hey, you're free. Here you go. They were just kind of threw out there. So Reconstruction, a part that's never discussed much in American history, kicked off. And during Reconstruction, great achievements were made. In the 1860s, you started to see more and more African Americans getting elected to office. In 1868, of course, the first African American lieutenant governor of a state was elected in the great state of Louisiana. A couple of years later, you saw some of the first U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen elected to D.C. And of course, in 1872, the very first African American governor of a state was elected, again back in Louisiana, being PBS Pinchback. In the 1870s, you saw places like Louisiana and South Carolina have very large numbers of African Americans sit in the state legislatures. So at this time, I kind of referenced my poster. I'll put that on the end. I had two posters I used, and basically it show a quote from Bishop Robert S. Williams with his picture, where it basically says in part that if you give us teachers, and you give us educated preachers, basically if you give us a chance, it won't be long before the things we prayed for come to pass. That was a quote he gave during one of his many speeches, and it kind of spoke to this situation. And of course, I also included a picture of Tulsa, some pictures of Tulsa at its height, along with a picture of Booker T. Washington, who was a friend of Bishop Williams, but who also was one of the leaders and educators of his day, who helped turn or coin Tulsa as Black Wall Street. So this Reconstruction boom, obviously, many people seeing this took this as a threat. It was also said that Tulsa was very rich, of course, and a lot of the surrounding towns were predominantly white, and of course they were living a little harder. So there was the animosity there of the surrounding towns seeing this prosperous place right there, pretty much at their doorstep. Of course, the needle to break the camel's back happened on May 31st of 1921. And that's when a 19-year-old African American male was accused of touching or inappropriately speaking to a 17-year-old Caucasian American female in an elevator. So of course he was arrested, and of course before any investigation was done, of course the attack happened. So some of the statistics from that day, right, is they had upwards of 300 African Americans killed, upwards of 800 African Americans injured, many hospitalized. The destruction was grotesque. It was over 35 square city blocks, resulting in $1.5 million in real property and 750,000 in personal property being lost, all within a 12 to 24-hour time period, which today equivalates to about $32.2 million. Of course, when this happened, no police intervened. In fact, many police took part in it. The ones that didn't were noted as giving their weapons to rioters. The sheriff himself, being outnumbered, actually deputized about 500 of the rioters. And again, there was shooting going on. No cops intervened. City on fire, buildings, churches, homes, banks, schools being burnt to the ground, smoke everywhere. No firefighters. So once things calmed down, of course, the National Guard came in, so everyone was happy, especially the African Americans who had just been ransacked. They said, hey, here comes help. Now things hopefully go back to normal. But to the shock of their surprise, the National Guard drove straight through the surrounding towns, the white towns that had just did the attack. They went straight into the African American towns where they arrested nearly 6,000 African American citizens, many of which stayed in jail over a week. So again, that shows some of that socialized racism, where people are seeing this happen, not stepping up, they're not trying to stop it. And of course, you see some re-victimizing here and blaming of the victim, because again, they go in and arrest the people whose town has been destroyed. Now, just imagine if that happened today, if you had a group of all black or all Hispanic or all white just go into downtown New York and destroy $32.2 million. There'd probably be an uproar. But when this happened, nothing. In fact, during my research, I found that the very next day, an article was out in Tulsa, and it actually said 13 white citizens killed during Negro uprising. That was like the lead story. So again, during this attack, about 13 Caucasian Americans were in fact killed, but no mention of the 6,000 interred African American, the 800 African Americans injured, the fact that over $1.5 million, 35 square blocks was destroyed, no mention of any of that. But again, this was the cultural norms of the time, where we had a society embracing and supporting the disparities based on race and ethnicity. So it becomes, this is 2021. This happened in 1921. So why am I sitting in the equal opportunity class hearing about it? And I would say it's because there's two ways you can look at it. One is many people honor their past and their ancestors and try to relive their ancestors or continue their progress so that their lives were not in vain. So from my perspective on that note, I look at my ancestors and I see that they were writing books to educate the public and trying to move things forward. So fast forward today, I also am republishing historical books, writing articles and trying to educate the public, whether it's on preserving graves to honor the history of the past, or writing articles like the one on this slide where I actually was highlighting a great African American leader during Black History Month. Now, looking at it historically, as you can see at the bottom, I think it all feeds together, because you have slavery, which led to Reconstruction, the uprising of an oppressed people, which sparked the Jim Crow, which was bringing down people who another group felt was rising too fast, which ultimately sparked the civil rights movement, because those oppressed people, having been oppressed as slaves, saw the heights they rose to during Reconstruction and being oppressed again by Jim Crow. It was only natural that the civil rights movement would happen. And of course, you look today and you still see things like the Black Lives Matter movement, which highlights things like police brutality, perceived injustices in the judicial system, and things of that nature. And of course, the military, we're all about good order and discipline. We're all about trust. When we go to combat, we expect our lives to be in others' hands and others' lives to be in our hands. That requires great trust and respect. So it becomes almost an oxymoron for us to support racism that affect the men and women child left and right, but then expect to have a cohesive unit that we can depend on one another and garrison our combat. So to me, this 1921 riot is very relevant today because of the lessons it teach and that we can draw from to go ahead and advise our commanders as EOLs and teach classes. And of course, this is my conclusion. We kind of went back over some of the things that we can draw from this, like socialization, discrimination, and how we can apply those to training today. But I also felt it was appropriate to have this picture of Miss Randall. She's 105, and there's about 100 survivors of the Tulsa 1921 attack that are still alive. But Ms. Randall has the distinction of being the only one that still resides in Tulsa. So while there was a mass exodus after this happened and over 10,000 African Americans fled, some families stayed and rebuilt. Her family was one. And even today, as the oldest member that resides in Tulsa and the only massacre survivor that still lives there, she's 105 years old, going on 106, and she's done great things to publicize this and bring it into the narrative of history in her area, resulting in different museums taking up the cause of highlighting this event, historical markers and things of that nature. So I felt she was a strong, powerful image to leave the audience with, just because of the fact that she's still here and what she's doing. So in a nutshell, that was it, because the class was supposed to be relatively short. So that's kind of how I went with it. And I got good reviews from it, good feedback from the class. So I believe that ultimately it was a success. So the two, I did want to show these. They're pretty big. They're about, I think, 2 feet tall, 3 feet long. I'll probably post a picture of me with one for context. But for now, I just kind of show it here so you can see it. But I did have two posters because obviously, training aids are important, and they kind of keep you from just being at a, being at a slideshow and kind of boring people. You don't want to do that. So I think that going ahead and bringing in some aids is a good idea. So at this time, I'm zooming in here, bringing them up. I'll show you the two slides I used, which again, they got good reviews as well. And then after that, I'd be very interested in seeing whatever comments you may have on it, what I could have done differently, or maybe, something you may have seen here that you didn't know. So let's get this up, and there we go. So this was one of the slides I used. And again, during the time we were talking, or I was talking about the height of Tulsa before the massacre, I had this picture up, which shows, of course, a vibrant town. You had, Black-owned businesses, fraternal organizations active, all these kind of things. So this was the first poster that I had, and then this was the second, and it basically shows the devastation caused by the attacks. And noted at the bottom, they actually have a photo, which is of the African American citizens being escorted by armed National Guard, the people they thought that was coming to help them, who in fact imprisoned them for about a week. And I did also have the president, who was President Harding at the time, because he did speak out against it. I mean, he was in one of those positions where As president, he did want to try to talk unity, but then again, it was the way of the day. So he did speak out against it. His words were not necessarily the strongest, but the fact that the president in office at that time came out and gave a speech which basically said, this is not who we are. Um, so hopefully we can rise above it. I think it's still a big deal and powerful. So anyway, that's how it went. So I appreciate your time and definitely look forward to the comments and have a great day.